Hey, folks, welcome to Due Process Institute's panel, Why Clean Slate Embodies Conservative Values, How Second Chance Policies Can Lead to Economic Growth and Reduce Crime. My name is Jason Pye. I'm the Vice President of the Due Process Institute. Prior to joining Due Process Institute in March 2001, I was the Vice President for Legislative Affairs for FreedomWorks. For those of you who aren't familiar with us, Due Process Institute is a bipartisan nonprofit that works to honor, preserve, and restore principles of fairness in the criminal legal system. Bipartisanship is important, more so now than ever before, because it shows Americans that Congress can work together and because legislation must be bipartisan to have credibility with the American people. Before we jump into the introductions of our panelists, we have an awesome panel today. I'm proud to call each of these folks on this panel personal friends, some of whom are Texas fans, but that's okay, being a Georgia Bulldogs fan myself. Please go ahead and play the video. We have a video from an impacted person that we want to show you guys so you can see how Clean Slate can help individuals who have been impacted by the criminal justice system. So Shanna Trey, please show that video.
What is this?
Oh, that's certificates, things that mommy did.
January 3rd, 2007, my son was born. I laid him on my chest, and I put my face down to his head. I knew he was mine.
I haven't seen this in so long.
This is funny. I was your age in this picture. 14. Yes.
This right here is a picture of my 18th birthday. It makes me crack up every time I see it.
Oh my God.
Oh God, I don't even know
You
if I
read
can.
that to me.
A lot of these letters is letters that I wrote to my son. He was 4 or 5 years old at the time that I was away when I was incarcerated. I said, "You look so handsome, like a little man."
I wish you could see what I see. You are beautiful, gorgeous, and amazing.
You remember that? This was that day.
It's my first passport as an adult.
Adoption paper.
Oh wow.
One of the many cards from my daughter.
A little keepsake that I hold on to.
Yeah, you was the old chip off the old block.
It's like looking in a mirror.
The bad records, they follow you for a long time, and it really can affect your living situation, your economic situations, and even your relationships.
It's one of the reasons why I lost custody of my son.
I applied to 5 universities who denied me. My alma mater for my master's in social work denied me because I had a felony.
No one would hire me. Everywhere I went, they were pulling up my record.
When I did get a job, I got a raise after 30 days, and on my 45th day, they called me and said I was terminated due to a background check. So I created my own business.
This was at my reentry awards where I was awarded for Professional of the Year and Personal Achievement in Reentry.
This was a certificate of graduation that I did in Florida while my son was in college.
This is actually my official LLC document.
Now I'm going for my PhD. It's almost like I'm trying to chase getting rid of my record by all these accomplishments. And I think you said that to me. And you said you don't need to prove anything to
You don't need
anybody.
to prove anything.
What record are you most proud of?
My master's degree in criminal justice. But you know what? Because I'm not a criminal. I'm so much more than my criminal record. These records are me now.
The record that I'm most proud of is my kids, my babies.
I think it's this one right here. That one. This picture represents hope, second chances, resilience, and character. And a chance for me to be the dad that my son deserves.
Thank you. Before we jump into questions, let me take a moment to introduce our panel. Reginald Darby is the federal legislative director for the Clean Slate Initiative. He was previously the deputy chief of staff and legislative director for the offices of Congressman Scott Taylor, a Republican from Virginia, and Congressman Greg Steube, a Republican from Florida. He's also a Texas Longhorns fan, but we're just going to ignore that today. Frank Russo is the Associate General Counsel of CPAC's Nolan Center for Justice. Previously, he was the Director of Government and Legislative Affairs at the National District Attorneys Association. He also worked for the House Judiciary Committee under Congressman Bob Goodlatte and the Senate Judiciary Committee under Senator Ted Cruz. Like me, he's an avid fan of the University of Georgia Bulldogs and therefore a great American. Jillian Snider is the policy director for the R Street Institute's Criminal Justice and Civil Liberties teams. Jillian and her team produce research and commentary on public policy related to all stages of the criminal justice system: policing, pretrial policy, sentencing, incarceration, juvenile justice, and reentry. Jillian is a retired New York City Police Department officer and currently serves as an adjunct lecturer at John Jay College, where she teaches in the Department of Law, Police Science, and Criminal Justice Administration. If you haven't had the chance to meet Jill, let me just tell you that she's an awesome person. And you've got to hear her say the word coffee with that New York accent that she has. I'm not going to try to emulate it. I would just embarrass myself. Patrick Purtill is the Director of Legislative Affairs for the Faith and Freedom Coalition. He also serves as the Charles Evans Hughes Lecturer at Colgate University, where he teaches a course on administrative law and the separation of powers doctrine. He was appointed by President George W. Bush to positions inside the United States Department of State and the Department of Justice. One of my favorite pastimes, believe it or not, is talking with Patrick about old school punk rock and ska music. So don't let him fool you with his background or his how he's fancy he's dressed today. Patrick is a music nerd just like me. The focus of our discussion today is the Clean Slate Act, H.R. 2930 and S. 5266, and the Fresh Start Act, H.R. 2983. For those of you who aren't familiar with the Clean Slate Act, it would automatically seal the records of individuals who have simple possession drug or low-level nonviolent marijuana offenses. It provides a petition process for the sealing of certain nonviolent offenses as well. The Fresh Start Act would allow states to apply for grants to build the infrastructure to automate existing record sealing or expungement laws. Currently, and this is also important, the bill doesn't authorize new funding for these grants. Let me also know that there's a wide variety of second chance related pieces of legislation out there. There's another one called the Kenneth P. Thompson Begin Again Act, which we're not going to discuss today, but it's just as important. And Kenneth P. Thompson Begin Again Act simply eliminates the current age restriction for the one expungement provision related to drugs, simple possession of drugs. In federal code, currently you have to be under the age of 21 to be eligible for that. This would just remove the age restriction. So before I jump into questions, my first one going to Frank. Let me just note, if you have a question and have the ability, I actually don't know if we have the ability to do this or not. I think we do. Please drop it in the chat. We want to, if we get to questions, we would like to, if we have enough time for questions, we would like to get some from the audience to fill in if possible. So Frank, I'm going to go to you first. It has nothing to do with you being a Bulldogs fan, but I'm going to go to you first. Describe to me exactly what the Clean Slate Act would do. I gave a brief overview of it there, but give us some more detail on what it would do.
Absolutely. First of all, thank you, Jason. Thank you to the Due Process Institute. And I would also helpfully note that it's the SEC champion Georgia Bulldogs we're celebrating today. So thank you for the ability to share with all of our friends on this call that we remain on top of the college football world and probably will for the long term. That is not what you asked about. So I'll dive a little bit deeper into the Clean Slate Act, but also first wanted to introduce to those staff on the call who do not know what we do here at CPAC. Obviously, you're familiar with our large organization and the work that we do around conference and events. But CPAC itself has also long been committed to the criminal justice mission of ensuring that our public safety system actually does what it says it would do, which is keep people safe but also ensure that communities are better off than how they started with. And it comes as no surprise if you're on this call that unfortunately we've fallen short of these goals. And we have really led ourselves in a position that doesn't actually not just help public safety, but potentially harms it and puts us in a place where we make things worse, not just on the people who are impacted by the system, but on the law enforcement and administrators and courts that are responsible for upholding the system. So our motto here at CPAC is accountability and redemption. And I can't think of a piece of legislation that fits that bill more than the Clean Slate Act. Jason mentioned HR 2930 has long been a bipartisan effort, both in the House and the Senate. But it's important to discuss what the bill does and doesn't do. Jason's hit the highlights on the fact that, yes, it automatically seals a record for simple possession or nonviolent offense involving marijuana. It creates a process, which we'll get back to, which is so valuable and important to our system, for folks to petition the court. It requires that those petitions, if needed, those individuals with those records can have a public defender, which is very helpful to making sure that we're equitable in this process. But here's the other two things that often get lost in the shuffle, and why I think a lot of law enforcement voices support this type of work. First is it protects employers from liability. Many claim arising out of the misconduct of an employee that relates to the criminally sealed record. Why is that? Well, it's pretty simple. Employers care deeply about the opportunity to bring such a vast and talented workforce to the table. One in three individuals in this country have a criminal record. Does it make any sense from a conservative standpoint to cut out that part of our society from the open market? No, of course not. And so I think that's why it's valuable to make sure that our employers are protected in this process, but they get a true chance to engage with this talented workforce. And then lastly, sometimes it's the error by omission, but it's actually intentional here. Law enforcement maintains access to these records. Public safety is at the core of everything we do at CPAC, and I will give credit to all of the groups on this call: Clean Slate Initiative, Due Process, Faith and Freedom, and obviously Jason or Jill and R Street. None of us in any petition or any position to harm law enforcement or limit their ability to keep communities safe. And so what we ensure in this bill is that federal, state, and local law enforcement all maintain access to these federal records, even if they're cleared for the individual for employment purposes and housing purposes. So we are ensuring that we don't separate this process from our ability to have the full picture should a future criminal case come up. And I always bring that up as my main, focus, because from day one on Clean Slate, there was never a discussion of limiting law enforcement access. In fact, it's always been a discussion: how do we ensure it exists? And there's nothing more conservative than, yes, redemption, but also ensuring that the accountability piece remains involved in the process, so that our friends in that investigator and prosecution community maintain access to the records that I think are vital to whether or not they need to bring a case at a certain level, whether that be higher charges, lower charges, etc. So the really exciting part about this bill is it really hits the high notes on making sure folks are actually given the opportunity to automatically expunge those records that we know are no threat to public safety. And then two, I'll circle back to where I started and then let Jason get back involved in the questioning, which is the process of applying should your record be more serious. What we're doing is giving folks a fair chance. And that chance involves the court system that all of you, especially working on Capitol Hill, have long said is the arbiter of whether there's a public safety decision that needs to be made or a different decision needs to be made to ensure that we protect communities. So that process involves the prosecution, the defense attorneys. We ensure access to public defenders, which is vital. So it's a fair playing field. And then we allow a judge to make a decision on the best set of facts that are available. That's how this system was supposed to work from day one. And one of the great parts of the Clean Slate Act is we don't take away from that system. We're not interested in altering that system. We are focused on ensuring that we present the facts to the court and the arbiter, and that we give individuals that second chance when they've earned it. And that's what separates Clean Slate from a lot of different criminal justice proposals. None of the ones you heard here today, but maybe over the past 4 years that could potentially be damaging to public safety. So as a conservative organization that's heavily invested in public safety, we know that Clean Slate strikes the right balance. And we'll probably get into all of the reasons why it's also a public safety inhibitor and helps actually create and improve public safety. But for now, I'll just leave it at there's a lot of mechanisms in this bill that I think lead to success.
Thank you, Frank. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, that was it. Maybe inhibitor wasn't.
No, I was going to ask you one quick follow-up because I don't know if I caught this when you were explaining what Clean Slate does. There are two types of notification go out. So on the petition side, so you have notification to the individual with the criminal record, who will then find out that he is eligible to make a motion or to apply or petition a court. And then there's notification to the prosecuting attorney's office, so they can review the record and then decide whether or not to speak on behalf of the petition or speak against the petition, and then a judge makes a determination based on those factors. Is that right?
That's 100% right. And one other quick thing I'll add, because I think it's so valuable. It allows the prosecution to take both sides of that position. Oftentimes, and having represented prosecutors, they will tell you two things. One is they are invested in the success of those folks who may want to come out and change their lives. Why? Because by the time that individual shows back up in their courtroom for another criminal case, it's too late. We've failed on the prevention side. We've failed to offer a true opportunity at redemption and accountability. And so prosecutors often want to be involved in the process. They want to assist in that reintegration into communities, and to provide them with that opportunity. It helps mend not just public safety problems, but it also helps mend the community between those who are impacted by the justice system and those involved working in it. And I don't think we think about that problem as often as we need to. And this bill does the right thing in ensuring that the prosecution can be on the side of success for that individual coming out of the criminal justice system.
Thank you, Frank. Reginald, how many states have passed sort of state level clean slate laws so far? I mean, I know that it's not just a federal effort. There are a number of states that are pursuing this as well. So can you tell us how many have done it?
So 12 states have passed clean slate laws, most recently New York. Some of the states that have really stood out has been Michigan, which implemented their clean slate law last year and saw over 1 million individuals have their record cleared. And then you also look at what we call our flagship state of Pennsylvania, who's in their third iteration of clean slate new policies right now. Right now, the Clean Slate Initiative and our state programs, we're focusing on getting a 50-state program, a 50-state plan where we are enacting clean slate laws and passing clean slate policies in every single state in the United States so that we can reach as many folks as possible and get as many records cleared as possible too.
And so among those states are Oklahoma and Utah, which are two of the most red-leaning conservative states out there, who have saw this necessary, saw this something that they wanted to pursue. I don't know if you want to speak to that or what, but I think that's a pretty important thing to highlight.
Absolutely. So in 2023, we hosted our Clean Slate convening in Oklahoma City. And while there, we had Governor Stent come in and share exactly why Clean Slate matters to a state like Oklahoma. We understand that individuals, when they are trying to access housing, trying to get access to school, trying to even get access to jobs, one of their main barriers is their records. So they saw that in the state of Oklahoma. They made sure they pushed that through. And they also worked in a coalition with different organizations ranging from law enforcement to prosecutors to community activists, just to make sure that everyone who could be involved was involved. And in that process, they learned that when you pass Clean Slate, when you get individuals the access that they need to these key areas, similar to what Frank was saying, you eliminate the issue around public safety. You actually bolster it up a little bit because you know that when someone has a job, and I'm speaking from my own personal experience, if I have a job, I'm not going to go out in these streets and commit crimes. If I know that I have a family that I have to go back to or a community that I have to go back and report to, I'm not going to be one of the individuals that are going to recidivize. I'm going to take pride in knowing that I am supporting my community and I have something to bring to my community in comparison to where I may have been before. So these coalitions came together. They worked directly with the state legislator, including our own Clean Slate Initiative states teams. And then they also pushed this forward so that we could have a clean slate law in the state of Oklahoma. And we're seeing great things going forward now as they prepare for the implementation around that clean slate law in the state of Oklahoma.
Thanks, Reginald. And since we mentioned Fresh Start Act, this is also part of the pieces of legislation we're pursuing. Obviously, not just the rest of this Congress, which is obviously waning at its end, but we're going to be aggressively pursuing in the 119th Congress. So can you tell us what the Fresh Start Act does?
Absolutely. So the Fresh Start Act, also known as 2983, is a bipartisan bill that focuses on providing a grant program or grants to states that have already passed their clean slate laws. We know that in key states that have passed all 12 of these, there are some budget shortfalls. There are some budget cuts that are happening. So that we can make sure that they are able to implement these clean slate laws. What we do is we create this program that we pulled funds from the N-CHIPS program, which is already established programming, so there's no new funding there. And basically, the states would apply, we would disperse the monies out to them, and this will allow them to modernize their state criminal justice data infrastructure, which ultimately means that we will be making sure that all of the manual records that they currently utilize in their systems is updated with the technology of today, and it's part of that automatic piece. We keep using the term automatic, automate. What does that mean? Well, ultimately, what that means is, let's say you're someone, use myself for example, and you have a record. A lot of times there's a stigma that comes along with that record, and there's also a fear and trauma that comes along with that, where you're not going to want to go back in the courtroom and try to see if you are eligible to have your record cleared. So instead, if you have a low-level nonviolent marijuana charge, you will automatically be qualified for your record to be cleared. However, if there are other charges outside of that, for example, if you have other nonviolent crimes that are not affiliated with drugs, then that would have to go through the petition process. So that's something completely different. But this would allow for individuals to have that access, to have their record cleared, and also to assist the states to implement their laws. One thing that we're also seeing when it comes to this is there's a few reasons why we want to do this. And the main reasons that is we want to make sure we're streamlining these record clearance, make sure that everyone has the access to it. But also we want to reduce these barriers. I just spoke about that on education, housing, and employment. But we also got to realize that a lot of these individuals, there are barriers well past that, which I'm pretty sure we're going to discuss later on down the road in this conversation. But we just want to make sure that we remove those barriers. And also we want to make sure that we are improving the data system. A lot of these systems are very antiquated. They're using systems like the DOS system where everything is just, have you guys ever seen Matrix where your screen is all the green letters just going up and down your computer? Well, imagine if that's someone's record. That's how people are like qualifying who has a record and where the records are. All of that is just super antiquated. No one knows how to operate within that. No one is actually paying attention to it, and no actual energy or funds are going into that. So you're going to have a lot of individuals out there who are going to remain having those barriers in place and not having the access to the other areas in their lives that they can then thrive in. Again, education, employment, and housing. And then lastly, we just want to make sure that we're holding the states accountable for these systems that they do have there, make sure that they are updating them, make sure that they are utilizing them the proper way and making it more accessible to the public. And then the last piece here is, as someone who is directly impacted, both as someone who's previously had a record and has had it expunged, but also had a father who actually just got released from the federal prison system in November, it only makes sense to make sure that we are providing as much assistance as possible to folks so that they can be contributing individuals in their communities. And I'm not patting myself on my back, but if it wasn't for the fact that I did have my record cleared as a high school senior in Austin, Texas, more than likely, I would not be here today to be able to have this conversation with you and advocate for others as well. So I do believe that having legislation like HR 2983 in place, assisting the states to put things in place to assist folks like myself and others from similar communities, then it would be a very, very dark day in this country where folks like myself would not have these opportunities to share the good news and the gospels of Clean Slate.
Thank you, Reginald. And just one, I actually, when I was in the early 90s, we had a computer that didn't have an operating system. So I wrote school papers in that C prompt, which was an absolute nightmare. And secondly, you should pat yourself on the back because, and also make sure you pat your father on the back for all of this as well. It's a huge accomplishment for you to have that record cleared to stay on the right track. And speaking as someone who I lost my father at the age of 12, and I know how differently my life could have turned out, particularly because in high school, I mean, I didn't do drugs or anything like that, but I hung out with a crowd that did, and I very easily could have fallen into that, particularly playing music and things to that effect. I know how easily my life could have turned out differently had I just chose, especially coming from a family where addiction runs in the family. My uncle and his uncle both had the same circumstances, losing a father at the age of 12. One turned to drugs, one turned to alcohol. And I very, very easily could have done the same. So this is going to involve a little participation from the panelists. So we discussed what the Clean Slate would do, Clean Slate Act would do. So let's go over briefly what it wouldn't do. Would it allow the sealing of sex offense records?
Absolutely not.
Okay. Would it allow those convicted of national security related offenses to seal their records?
Absolutely not.
Would it allow the sealing of records for those convicted of violent crimes?
Absolutely not.
I'm noting that Reginald's the only one answering these questions. Would it prevent law enforcement and courts to access these records? All right. So that kind of explains, like, there are in the legislation itself, there are very specific explainers, definitions of what is not considered to be a nonviolent offense. So you can look at the legislation itself and see that. Patrick, you work for the Faith and Freedom Coalition, one of the most well-known faith-based advocacy organizations in the country. Coming from a perspective of faith, what convinced you and Tim Head and the other advocates at Faith and Freedom Coalition to support the Clean Slate Act and the Fresh Start Act?
Sure, Jason, thanks. Thanks for pulling this together today. For us, we've been involved in this. I testified on the original Pennsylvania bill back in a long time ago. This is something that is very important to us. And I think that we come at it, both because we think it's good public policy, but also from a faith-based perspective. I guess there are really two drivers behind it for us. One is the fact that we just believe in the inherent worth and dignity of each individual person. Whatever people have done, they're still people. They're still part of our community. They're part of the, for lack of a better term, the family of man. We're all together. And I oftentimes think of, there's a great line from St. Augustine when he's watching someone be taken away to the scaffold to be executed. And he looks at the person next to him and he says, "There, but for the grace of God, go I." We're all people. We're all flawed. We all make mistakes. Now we do need to pay for those mistakes. It's not that that's not a get out of jail free card. But that's the whole from the faith-based perspective, the entire idea of redemption is core to it, and it recognizes that we're flawed, that we're all flawed, but that we all have an inherent worth and dignity that is just unfathomable. So that's why we're involved with it. And I think that what I really like about Clean Slate is, one, that it's so targeted at the people who have done everything we've asked them to do to redeem their lives. I'm also an attorney, so there are four key elements to our criminal justice system, all of which are equally important, but don't necessarily all get equal attention at every time. The first is deterrence. We have criminal laws because, to begin with, we want to deter crime, because crime harms society, it harms families, it harms the polity at whole, and it's something that we come together as a self-governing people to say this is not acceptable. So it's meant to deter a victim from coming into existence to begin with. Then it's also meant to incapacitate people who have committed crimes so that they can't commit more crimes. That incapacitation is a public safety piece. Then you've also got, there is a retributive element to it. Crime does need to be punished because it is harmful. But there is the redemptive piece to it. The entire reason for the criminal justice system, which we used to call the corrections system, was to correct behavior, was to give people a chance to pay a penalty for their actions, but then to redeem themselves and to re-enter back into society. And for me, that's the critical piece, because that's really where you get the big bang for your public safety. You folks who have committed crimes before amend their lives and then therefore can safely re-enter back into society, and they don't create new victims. They don't and they don't eat up law enforcement resources. So it's, for us, it's always been that crime needed to be punished, but punishment should never, ever last forever. I oftentimes think about it as I have three grown children. And if you ask them, they would think that I was, they would definitely tell you I was the meanest dad on the planet Earth. But when they did something wrong, they were punished. But the punishment was meant to correct the behavior so that they then didn't do it again. That's the entire point of punishment. And if they were punished, I didn't punish them forever. Nobody got grounded for eternity. Once it was done because the key was you wanted that proper pro-social behavior at the end of it. And people who have paid their debt to society for low-level nonviolent offenses, who've reformed their lives, who've done everything we've asked them to do, they deserve to be welcomed back into society and given that second chance. It's that in our mind, that is, it's not just good. It's not just kind of based on our faith. It's just based on good common sense, where there's no tension between reason and revelation, as they would say on this issue. People who pay their debts and amend their lives, that's what we want. And when they do it, they should be rewarded and restored to society. So that's how we approach it. And we really like the clean slate approach because it's very targeted. And it comes it's targeted to people who were low level to begin with. And it comes at the end of the process. There's no get out of jail free card here. This is people who have been convicted. They've served their time. They've complied with their terms of supervised release after their term of imprisonment. They've gone after that has ended. They've remained crime free and been productive members of society. The whole point here is to really just say, you've done everything we've asked you to do. Now we're just it's done. It's over. We're moving on. You get to move on with your life. By the clean slate, as others have said, it really opens up the ability for them to take that next step forward after they've already done a lot of work to get a better job, to get better housing, to go back and get an education and not be burdened by a mistake they made in the past. And the one thing that I would point out on this bill that I love that hasn't been mentioned yet is because I think a lot of people don't realize this. This would also deal with folks who were arrested but never charged, or charged and never prosecuted, or prosecuted and acquitted, found innocent, and yet that arrest record still hangs over them and it's still a burden. And these are people who, literally were not convicted of a crime. That to me that's and I was actually shocked when I learned that, even as a lawyer. This is not something I learned in crim law. I learned working at the Department of Justice afterwards. The idea that you could be punished for an arrest, the simple arrest record would follow you, even when you were never charged or if you were found innocent, was shocking to me. So the fact that this cleans that up, I think, is something very important for everyone.
Thank you, Patrick. Before I go to our cleanup hitter, Jill, I want to note that I was informed that we don't have the chat function today available. But worry not, you can email me. I'll respond to you and get you what you need. You can email me at jason@idueprocess.org. Again, that's jason@idueprocess.org. So if you have a question for our panelists or their particular point of view, or just want to learn more, email me. I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Within the day. And another thing real fast, because I forgot to mention this, I mentioned the Kenneth P. Thompson Begin Again Act, but I forgot to give the bill numbers. That's HR 4958 and S 2596, both bipartisan bills that you should take a look at. Jill, let's go to you. You worked for the New York City Police Department. You've seen some stuff, no doubt. And you've even told me some of those stories. What led you to support the Clean Slate Act and the Fresh Start Act, and why should law enforcement, whether it's individual officers or organizations, why should they get behind these bills?
Well, thank you again, Due Process and Jason and Shanna, for hosting this, and thank you to my colleagues that are already spoken. And you took most of my ideas, Frank and Reginald, particularly. But we have spent most of this call talking about second chances, redemption, fairness, reducing barriers, looking at the people who have committed crimes, have remained crime-free, and are entitled or should be entitled to start their life over again and be successful. But what we haven't really discussed is how when they don't have that opportunity, when they don't have that second chance, they are the individuals who are consistently cycling through the system. They are committing the survival crime out of sheer necessity. Most arrests in this country are for low-level offenses, and that's just the reality. We do wish that it was more glamorous, and we do wish that we were always chasing like the super bad guy and keeping the streets super safe. But in reality, we have about 6% of people in this country who commit 60% of the violent, serious, major crime. But yet our law enforcement efforts are so heavily concentrated into these low-level, non-violent, repeat offenders. Again, I say repeat offenders because they haven't been afforded the opportunity to have a second chance, to get a job that provides them with just a livable wage, get housing that the rest of us often take for granted. So what does that do? That puts a serious burden on law enforcement. We are already seeing agencies across this country stretched so thin. We don't have enough investigators to close cases. We have unsolved murders. We have unsolved robberies. We have unsolved rapes. We have unsolved felony assaults and domestic battery cases because law enforcement is so unfortunately suckered into dealing with the repetitive 911 calls for service because they have to go answer those calls. Instead, they should be back doing their surveillance, their investigation, trying to put away the serious criminals who make the rest of us in society actually fear for our safety. And it's not the individuals who would be afforded this clean slate if this bill was to pass, honestly. I mean, I was a cop in the Bronx and in Brooklyn. I did narcotics for a long time. I did anti-crime for a long time. I did a lot of, the cool assignments, but the sad reality, and I don't like to admit it often, but most of the people that I encountered were for a little bit of weed or a little petty theft. And not to say I condone criminality, and I do believe in holding people accountable for their crimes, but over the course of my career, I would often arrest the same person every other week or every other month. And it wasn't because they were a bad person. It was because they couldn't figure out how to survive. And if they would just have the opportunity, what Clean Slate would do, they would be able to go out there and, be a law-abiding citizen. That's what they want. I worked in intelligence for some time, and I had the opportunity, which was a blessing and a curse, but to debrief people after arrests. And I debriefed people who were charged with serious, heinous crimes. But most of the time, I talked to people who were they were down in their luck. They were in a circle, this vicious cycle where they couldn't get out of it. And they needed to go steal something for their kid, or they needed to steal something to sell so that they could have enough money to give their child lunch money to go to school, like stuff just like that. And law enforcement, honestly, when you talk to them one-on-one, most of us took this job because we wanted to protect society from violent criminals, the super bad criminals the predators, the ones that we watch the news and we're, oh my goodness, that's who law enforcement signed up to go after. We don't want to put people in the system who don't want to be in the system, but instead feel so compelled by their unfortunate circumstance and their inability to get out of that circumstance. Law enforcement, we don't want to do that to someone repetitively, but that's just the position that we're put in right now because Clean Slate hasn't passed. So honestly, and I could go on all day, but from a law enforcement perspective, I think, and most of my law enforcement colleagues that I still talk to, we want to protect society from violent offenders. Like I said, the murderers, the rapists, the robbers, the people who make normal everyday folks feel unsafe when they're on their way to work or they're waiting for the subway. That's who law enforcement needs to target. And because they spend so much time answering 911 calls for service for low-level offenses, they're not able to really put all of their investigative efforts into closing cases and giving justice to victims.
Thank you, Jill. And we're gonna discuss how this might impact crime rates later. But I do want to note if staff are listening to this and wondering about clearance rates, I mean, clearance rates, I think for violent offenses are around the 40% range. So that's if you commit a violent crime, you have a 40% chance of getting arrested. Essentially, in the homicide, murder or clearance rate is around 50%. That just gives you an idea of some of what Jill's talking about, which I think is vitally important to highlight, particularly when you're talking about violent crime rates overall, which I should note are down, but we'll come back to that in a second. So the next several questions are for all of you. So if you want to jump in, just raise your hand real fast, and I'm going to move my questions list over here so I can see Jill better. So each of you or most of you have mentioned barriers at some point, whether it's housing is one, education is one. So let's discuss the types of barriers a person who has an arrest or a conviction faces when they're trying to find a job, or even trying to get something as simple as just getting an apartment, which is one of the stories. Just to note, Matthew Charles, who was the first individual released under the First Step Act, he was serving time for a crack cocaine offense, and his record was automatically changed to reflect the Fair Sentencing Act of 2010. Matthew couldn't get an apartment because of his conviction. Now, that's Matthew's story is a little bit separate from what we're talking about with Clean Slate and Fresh Start, but it does highlight the barrier that people like him face when they try to re-enter society and try to get housing. So I don't know who wants to take this, but let's discuss those barriers. Reginald?
So, no, I think this is a really good question because this is something that our CEO, Sheena Mead, talks about all the time. If you have a chance, check out her TED Talk. One thing is, for her, she had written a bad check to take care of her kids as a single mom at a Walmart, which I believe was maybe for $80-something, a very minimal amount, her very first time doing something like that. And then the sheriff of the county that she lived in came, knocked on her door, arrested her in front of her children, took her in, but was not necessarily convicted. Again, this goes back to Patrick's point, arrested with no conviction, but still having this on your record. The one area that she says has impacted her the most was the fact that because of that arrest and the decision that she made to take care of her kids, she was not able to volunteer as a chaperone to go with her children to any of their school events. For some that may seem a little minor, or very little, but that's part of the human dignity part. When you take that away from someone, especially a single mother, you take away their drive to want to do anything else sometimes. Luckily, that was not the case for Sheena. But in this case, we want to make sure that we're not taking that human dignity from folks. When people go in, they do their time, they come out, they pay their restitution, they remain crime-free. It's our jobs as their fellow, like you said, what's the term you used, Patrick? Family man, or there was a term you for all humanity.
Yeah. Just the family of man,
Family of man.
Like
it's our job to take care of each other in that way. And this is a huge proponent for that. I pass in Clean Slate, putting in the measures that would allow for individuals who, again, remain crime-free, have done all their time, pay back their restitution. Give them that opportunity, give them that second chance, that third chance, that fourth chance sometimes, so that they can be those contributing individuals within their communities, because they want to be those contributing individuals to their communities. Another barrier is the access to education. We know that I believe it's nearly about 73%, I could be wrong there. Universities and colleges utilize background checks for individuals to gain access and admissions to their universities and colleges. If I did not have my record cleared as a senior in high school, there would have been a good chance that I would not be able to go to Howard University, the best university in the United States. And that would have held me back from so many different opportunities, again, from being here today. So we have to make sure that we keep that in people's mind and just make sure they know that when you provide these opportunities and you clear a pathway forward for individuals who are trying to do the right thing, they're going to do the right thing. And then that lends itself to our public safety and improving it and lowering recidivism rates and everything else that may be attached to that.
Anybody else?
I think we've all said this already, but just to put a little flesh on it, especially in the employment area, where I think more than 90%, I want to say 92% of employers run some type of background check, which is why I think that the liability shield is so important, so that small businesses don't feel like they're going to be sued by some. I am a lawyer. Can I say shyster? Can I, somebody who's just, you're just fishing for settlements from small businesses that really get crushed by them. And from a public safety standpoint, the thing to remember is the best predictor of someone successfully reentering into society is gainful employment. That does more to promote public safety of folks who are coming back into our communities than anything else. And the thing we have to remember about the Clean Slate is these are people who are already employed because they've already met all their conditions of supervision, and they've been out for at least off of supervision for at least a year, so they're already employed. What you get with the record clearing is when people get their records cleared, they oftentimes see something like a 50% increase in their income because they're able to apply for better jobs. And it just puts them on that path to complete reintegration, which is a public safety win for all of us.
Patrick, you mentioned employers, and I do. That's part of my next question, because I'm a nerd when it comes to demographic research as well as the workforce. And America's approach to formerly incarcerated persons has long been unsustainable from a cost perspective. It costs us billions of dollars each year just at the federal level. I mean, if you look at the Bureau of Prisons annual appropriation, it's, I think, between $8 and $9 billion. But it's also unsustainable from a labor perspective. The Congressional Budget Office projects that America will see more deaths than births among the Native population by 2040. That is not that far away. But here we have an entire population, individuals with a criminal record and people who have been incarcerated. And if you're incarcerated, you have a minimum unemployment rate at any given time of 60%. And these individuals are, in many instances, excluded from the workforce. So my question is, are you seeing the business community rally behind Clean Slate and Fresh Start or any other second chance legislation? And I'm going to, again, open to everybody. Just raise your hand real quick if you want to take it. No one's jumping.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Frank.
I'll break the ice on that because I think it's such an important and invaluable question, which the answer obviously is yes, that there's a business community interest in this. And I'll join Patrick on the attorney trend of, like, if we want to have a Zoom on tort reform, we can do that at a separate date and time, but certainly CPAC in. The business and labor question is so invaluable because of what you've laid out, which is we have left out a talented workforce to a degree that really doesn't make doesn't match any common sense bar. And what you will do if you talk to any second chance employer is find out that these individuals who come out and work in the small business community, the large business community, the satisfaction rate from those employers is nearly double all of the rest of the employees. It is so clearly a benefit, not just to that formerly incarcerated individual, but also to that employer to have these individuals come in, because they're not just grateful for the job. They have developed significant life skills and talents that have been wasted in our criminal justice system. And again, doesn't take away from the fact that there needed to be accountability from that initial offense, but does include a new subset in skills. And I hate to talk about it so high, in terms of art. These are people who genuinely make our communities better, and we're refusing to give them the chance. And every time that we do, the business leader who hires those individuals comes back to us, whether it be in the law enforcement community, the advocacy community, the victims' rights community, or just basic community and political leaders, that says, please allow me the opportunity to hire more individuals who are coming out of incarceration and who have deserved and earned this second chance. And we've just fallen short on that.
Congressman David Schweikert talks about it usually once a week. He gives these talks about anything from the federal budget to age demographics in the United States and how we're getting older as a society. He's actually talked about some of the individuals who live in Arizona who've been incarcerated, gone through rehabilitative programming, learned trade skills, came out, been able to find a job and make a decent livable wage. And Patrick, the line I always say is the best recidivism reduction program you could possibly have is a good paying job.
Absolutely. And the folks who employ these reentering folks, they know that frankly better than we do. There's a there's a Midwestern state that I spent some time in, and I'll leave it, I won't mention it, but the Republican chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee in that state, who is very tough on crime. He also runs a manufacturing business in his day job. And he hires literally, I mean, he works with the prison system to hire people when they're coming in, and thinks that they're some of the best employees he's ever had. They're so thankful to have the job, so thankful to have an opportunity. They really want to put their lives back on the straight and narrow. He says they always show up on time. They always work hard. So it's if you talk to these employers, they know that these folks make really, really good employees, that they want to succeed, they want to change their lives. And those are exactly the kind of people we need to be given this opportunity to.
Yeah, and
Rich, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, I'll just take a little bit further. There's an estimate out there that every year our GDP is impacted by this, not hiring this sort of population of folks, anywhere from 78 billion to 87 billion. And I'll take it a step further. The U.S. Chamber just recently put out and said, for every 100 jobs that we have in manufacturing or hospitality or those sort of industries, we only have 73 people to fill every 100 roles. So that leaves us a whole 27 roles out there that we could be hiring folks on and filling these positions. So just imagine what that can look like, especially with our unemployment rate, bringing that further down and making sure that we are providing these opportunities again.
And you can look at the JOLT survey that the Bureau of Labor Statistics releases every month. The JOLT survey and compare that to the number of people who are actively unemployed but actively looking for work. You'll see a gap of I've seen it as high as 1 million. Not to say it's like that right now, but you'll see a pretty large gap. And there are obviously other details that go along with that, and such as being able to move around the country where people are hiring, but if you look anywhere in your local community, whether it's DC, Nova, Maryland, or near where I live in Richmond, there are employers hiring who, in this class of workers, are often excluded. And
Jason, the only other thing I would throw in there is I think this is also a really important issue, not just for the employment piece, but for a lot of communities, especially more rural communities. Where small businesses in rural communities are particularly hurting, and this is a workforce issue for them. And it really can do things. It can hold rural communities together. It can keep jobs in rural communities, and it can keep people in rural communities employed.
Yeah, and just want to make this explicit. Employment is the number one factor in recidivism. So moving on to our next question. And Jill, this is probably more suited for you, considering being someone in law enforcement as well as teaching criminal justice. How would public safety be strengthened by clean slate legislation? And is there any concern that second chance legislation could lead to an increase in crime rates?
So this actually ties into both law enforcement and criminology, because I teach, criminological theory and the motivational factors behind why people commit crime. And I would actually say very wholeheartedly, and again, we don't have longitudinal research to say this with 100% certainty, but based on criminogenic behavior, individuals who are afforded second chances, and this bill, let's always be repeating it, that people have to complete their sentence, they have to complete their community supervision term, they have to be crime-free for an extended period of time, and at the conclusion of that is when they would be eligible for this second chance. So in that time, if they remain crime-free, and obviously the federal versus the state legislation varies, but it's a considerable amount. Some states is 3 years, 7 years. But the most important factor to know is if an individual hasn't committed crime in that much time, they are no more likely than any of us in this call to commit a crime again. So that's something that really needs to be stressed, because looking at it from that regard, if they went crime-free for 3 years, the recidivism rate's roughly around 67% after 3 years of release. And these individuals that would be eligible for a second chance wouldn't have fallen into that category because they remained crime-free. So I don't see this ever being anything that's going to jeopardize public safety, but instead really going to bolster, as everyone else on this call has said, it's going to increase people going out into the workforce. We need people to be into the workforce, and we also need law enforcement to focus their efforts on the much more serious criminals.
There was a 2020 study conducted by the University of Michigan Law School. It found that 5-year recidivism rate as measured by rearrest. That's not reconviction. That's not reincarceration. This is rearrest, which is sort of the highest measure of recidivism for individuals in Michigan whose records were expunged. The recidivism rate was 7.1%. That is absurdly low, and it's phenomenal. Only 2.6% of those who were arrested of those rearrested were arrested for a violent crime. Recidivism as measured by reconviction was 4.2%, and then less than 1% being convicted of a violent crime, and only 1% being convicted of a felony. The study authors, and this is the most salient point, the study authors explained that expungement recipients in Michigan actually pose a lower crime risk than the general population. And then Patrick mentioned salary boosts, things like that. The study also looked at economic outcomes of expungement with Michigan expungement recipients, and they saw annualized wage gains of $4,295 for men and $4,594 for women. And then when compared to individuals who went through job training programs, they were significantly lower, only $471 for men and $832 for women. You can find that in a blog post at idueprocess.org. It's under my name and then Shanna, our president. Frank, do you want to weigh in here, or can I move on, my friend?
You can move on. I think Patrick and Jill have done a sufficient job. Thank you. I'm glad you always.
Let me. I've been in a couple meetings like this, and these are rare. But I've been in a couple meetings like this where someone will tell me that they are fine with a second chance, or that they're fine with generally with criminal justice reform legislation, like First Step Act. They were fine with First Step Act. In some cases, they even voted for it. But they have also said that someone who commits a crime should live with the lifelong consequences that often come with a criminal record. What would you say to someone who says that? And raise your hand if you want to answer.
I would wholeheartedly disagree with that. And the reason that is just for me and my faith. I serve a God who provides second chances left and right. He teaches us to forgive individuals countlessly, more than you can actually count as a human being. And in that, if my God can forgive me for the things that I've done, why can't we forgive each other and give each other the opportunities to do better as human beings? So I would have to wholeheartedly agree with that statement.
Thank you, Reginald. Anybody else?
Reginald hit I think the good note that especially CPAC, us, we have a faith element to the work we do, and obviously Patrick does, and that's incredibly valuable. But let me add this: they do. You never get the time back if you've had someone impacted by the system that you've lost by having to serve or go through the criminal, court process. If you've even gone through the civil process, it takes years off of your life, let alone any sort of criminal. As someone personally who's been on both sides of that, who had family members who are affected by some of the poor decisions making they've had in some of the criminal justice process, and myself being more in the prosecution role and having to solve a lot of these public safety problems, something Jill has, it does stay with you for your life. Here's the reality, though. It's not supposed to hold you down for your life. And that's what we're doing. And so what I've said to a lot of folks, and I like criminal justice modernization or fixing over reform, it doesn't need reform, it needs to be fixed. And this is not the purpose of the system to hold someone down for their entire lives. It sure does leave them with a mark. And that unfortunately sometimes is earned and sometimes it's not earned. And we can discuss when that's appropriate. But the reality is it's being used to hold down an individual for their entire life. And that is not the criminal justice system we've set up, nor should it be. So I've been in those meetings too. And if you voted for First Step, you supported it. But even if you've just supported a change to our criminal justice system, whether it be because of weaponization or the politics involved, you understand the basic tenet of this is not supposed to hold people down for the rest of their lives, except for the very limited individuals who constantly pose a threat to public safety. And that's not who we're talking about.
Yeah. What is it Pat Nolan always said? We need to go after the people we're scared of, not the people we're mad at.
That's right.
And yeah, and Pat Nolan's the sort of godfather of conservative criminal justice reform. Before we wrap up, I want to ask you guys a question, then I'll also offer you the chance to take final thoughts. And this is for all of you. Why do we need the Clean Slate Act and the Fresh Start Act, or any of the other second chance related pieces of legislation out there? So each of you answer that question, then give me your final thoughts before we wrap. Reginald, I'll start with you.
Oh, I was hoping someone else would go first, but it's all right.
I was going to go first, but
all right, Jill, we'll go with you.
Go for it, Jill. Go for it.
Because Frank just inspired me. So at our street, what we do is we do a lot of work, and it's criminal justice reform space, but we actually are finding Clean Slate to be a criminal justice safety solution. We're using the word solution when we discuss Clean Slate because we're not really reforming the system. We're solving a major problem for us and for those justice involved people because they did their time. And that was going back to the previous question. I've talked to offices that's like, oh, if you commit a crime, it should stay with you for life. You should always be punished or feel the wrath of the punishment. I've heard words like that. And I'm like, that's some biblical stuff. But these individuals have already served their time in a carceral setting. They have come out and they've served their time in a community supervision setting. They have met every condition of their release. They've obviously, lost time with their friends, their family, their loved one. They haven't been afforded the opportunities that the rest of us have. So that will stay with them forever. But this blemish, because most of these individuals made one mistake that is now going to mess them up for the rest of their lives if we don't do this, if we don't move this Clean Slate bill forward.
Thank you, Jill. Patrick, I'm going to go to you next.
I guess what I would say, I would amen everything that I've heard so far. But I guess what I like about the Clean Slate is not just, I almost don't see it as a reward to someone. I see it as a tool in the criminal justice system to incentivize exactly the type of pro-social behavior and compliance with the law that leads to safe, stable, and dynamic communities. So it's actually, in one sense, it comes at the very end as kind of a recognition of what people have already achieved on their own. We're really just recognizing what they've done. We're not really giving them anything. And I think I think that one of the problems in the criminal justice world, and I've been a prosecutor, I've worked for a federal judge. It's definitely not, it's not a soft on crime approach. I think that one of the things that the criminal justice system does lack, though, is incentives as well as punishments. It needs, for put it in the vernacular, it could use a few more carrots to go with the sticks that it has. And the sticks are important, but carrots are important as well. And I think rewarding the type of behavior that we want out of people actually incentivizes law-abidingness and therefore increases public safety. I think it's we don't usually think of Clean Slate that way, but I think it's a powerful piece of what it does.
Governor Deal, when he implemented the drug courts in Georgia to help get people a second chance, he took to calling them accountability courts. And Frank knows this well, also being from Georgia, because so much was required of them to graduate from the drug court system, to graduate from the accountability court system, that if they messed up, they would face a punishment of either incarceration or whatever, probation, whatever the case may be. Because Clean Slate requires that accountability. It requires you to keep your to stay free of crime for a year, to do everything the court requires of you. So I think that, Patrick, is a really important point. I just wanted to emphasize it. Frank, I'm going to go to you next.
I get the quick amen because we were past the 2:00 hour, but you've hit on it. It's accountability and redemption has been our core values at CPAC for a long time, and it's something we brand, not just as a tool to talk about what we care about, but also as the reality of what our system was supposed to be doing. And it has failed in many ways to both hold people accountable, but also to provide that redemption. And this is a perfect opportunity to do both of those things. I'll begin where I end, end where I begin, which is we have got to be supportive as Congress and as lawmakers and advocates, and as folks who come from the system, of a system that ensures public safety, but in all aspects, the front, the middle, and the back end. And we have failed I think in all three categories, and we have an opportunity now to fix it. So really excited, and I know that the folks at Due Process will share our contact information. Please do not hesitate to reach out. We are here to help you. This is not a mission we want anyone to go on their own. We go together. Patrick already stole my line, so you get the point.
Thank you, Frank. And Reginald, to you.
I'm gonna keep it real simple here. One thing that we don't necessarily think about all the time when it comes to clean slate or any other CJ legislation is that it goes beyond the person who has the record. As someone who was a child of an individual in and out of the prison system, I think back to what if he was able to get a clean slate, his first offense? What if my uncle was able to get a clean slate from his first offense? What if my cousin was able to get a clean slate from their first offense? What would that look like for my family, for the communities that we lived in, for the work that we were wanting to do in our communities if we had them there with us? So I just employ everyone on this call, giving huge kudos to Due Process Institute, R Street, Patrick at Faith and Freedom, and our friends at CPAC. What if we all just took an effort to support something like Clean Slate and potentially have someone within your own family, which I'm sure you do know, who could be impacted by this and have their lives changed for the better? So similar to what Jillian said, this is a solution, and similar to what Frank said, we need to fix it. And I do believe that Clean Slate is that fix.
Thank you, Reginald. I hope everyone who's watched us today is convinced that the conservative case for conservative case for second chance legislation like the Clean Slate Act and the Fresh Start Act. And I hope you think it's been made. I'll also note that the Second Chance Reauthorization Act passed the Senate last week by unanimous consent. We're hopeful that the House swiftly considers that bill, if not this week, then next week. Thank you to all of our panelists, Frank, Jill, Patrick, Reginald. Thank you to all of you who have joined us today. If you have a question for one of our panelists, or if you want to get more information about the Clean Slate Act and the Fresh Start Act, or just generally want to learn more about second chance related legislation or initiatives, please reach out to me at jason@idueprocess.org. I'll make sure to respond to you and get you what you need. You can also find more information on the Due Process Institute at idueprocess.org. Thank you, folks. Thank you guys for your time today. It's good to see all of you. And go dogs.